This factory even hires middle school grads, smirked the department head, taking some kind of sick pleasure in it. Don't take it easy just because it's a factory job. He condescended. The guy's always been like this. I've been itching to put him in his place, but I never dreamed it would go down like it did. My name's Joe. At 23, I'm clocking in at the factory. My old man was a sucker for the gamble, and Mom had a hard time because of it. To help her out, I started job hunting right after middle school. Dad? He pulled a Houdini and was just gone one day. Mom didn't want a divorce because she couldn't stand the idea of me labeled as a single-parent kid, but she regrets not splitting up with him sooner. As for me, I don't sweat about my dad. Back in grade school, I was this negative kid. No friends, no hobbies. I blame it all on Dad's screw-ups, but my life took a turn when I met this guy. It was in 5th grade, springtime. This kid was my age, moved in next door. Not the best at socializing, I didn't start conversations, but out of the blue, he struck up a chat when I was passing his house. "Call me Ken," he said. It was confusing at first, but it seems like he was asking me to call him Ken. His English was quirky, kind of broken. Turns out, he was half Mexican, still polishing his English. Back then, I thought all Mexicans had dark hair, so I didn't peg him as Mexican with his blonde hair. Ken had moved to the States because of his parents' work. He lived in the sticks where foreigners were as rare as hen's teeth, so Ken got some side eye from folks. But Ken? He never let it get to him. He'd tag along to school when I went, and he'd head home when I did. Before I knew it, I was keeping step with him. Bit by bit, I opened up, and his upbeat attitude started rubbing off on me. "Hey, is Spanish hard?" I asked him one day. Felt kind of high and mighty teaching him English, but truth is, English is all I've got. Compared to Ken, who speaks Spanish and is learning English, I was in the minor league. That day was a game changer. He started speaking to me in Spanish. Guy has a flair for going all out, but thanks to him, middle school Spanish was a breeze. He's the guy who pulled a 180 on my life. After middle school, I wanted to help Mom ASAP, so I hit the job market. Ken moved on to higher education, but we both still live at home and were as tight as ever. Not many places hire folks straight out of middle school, so I applied to a factory that was hiring and by some miracle got in. It was a small operation, but the boss was a decent guy and I liked working there. But over the past few years, the factory started to wobble financially. Then, 2 years ago, the big boss finally decided to entertain the idea of a buyout. There was this foreign firm that had been sniffing around our tech, looking to buy us out, and the big boss hung in there as long as he could, but he didn't want to leave us workers high and dry. Turns out, our pay didn't get a small bump, and the conditions aren't half bad. But there's one guy who's a total thorn in our side. "Working up a sweat today? Factory work is beneath an elite like me. Knock yourself out," says Jack, the department manager, stinking up the place with his smoky breath as he looms around the factory. Jack came on board when the management changed post-takeover. Funny thing is, even though the factory grounds are a smoke-free zone, we've all caught Zach sneaking a smoke here and there. I tried to tell him to quit it since it's a risky move, but all I got was a menacing glare.
Are you talking back to me?
He never misses a chance to remind us he's some sort of an elite, proud grad of a fancy university. One day, out of the blue, Zach turned to me and asked,
What college did you graduate from?
Caught off guard, I mumbled, well, I didn't go to high school, let alone college. He responded with a hearty laugh.
What? You only finished middle school? I thought folks like that only existed in the boonies. What use is a guy who only finished middle school? Did the old boss hire you out of pity? Just so you know, the previous president's evaluation means Jack in the future.
He hollered, making sure everyone in earshot heard. From that point on, he treated me like dirt, dubbing me the middle school graduate. I bet he doesn't even recall my real name. After another tough day, I saw my buddy Steve walking over a coffee for me.
Joe, today was tough again, wasn't it?
He said. He and I are the same age, and he came on board after graduating from a trade high school. Technically, I outrank him, but he's taught me a lot and is a trusted friend. I want to put Zach in his place someday, I confessed over a swig of coffee, and Steve chuckled.
That's impressive. I admire your positivity.
Fast forward a few days, Zach rolls into the factory announcing,
I'm inviting you guys to a social gathering. The big wigs will be there too, so don't screw it up. It's not really your scene, but try to clean up nice.
The venue for the shindig is a posh hotel near the biggest train station around these parts. It's about a half-hour jaunt from the factory, but the vibe is totally silly, a stark contrast to our country landscape. We were pretty psyched about going somewhere new and counted down the days to the gathering. When the big day arrived, Steve and I suited up and made our way to the hotel.
I wonder what a social gathering is like. We wouldn't get to step into a hotel like this unless it was a special occasion, so we better make the most of it.
Steve pondered aloud, pretty excited. Ever since the management changed, we've hardly had a chance to meet anyone above Zach. The president won't be at the gathering, but the executive director will. We, simple factory folk, don't really get the executive director's role, but we know he's a big deal. Walking into the hotel, we were taken aback by its opulence. As we nervously loitered at the venue, a group of strangers walked in from the entrance. Zach ushered them in.
Mr. Executive Director, this way.
Is that the executive director? Is he a Latino? I asked Steve. He replied,
Ah, seems so. First time I'm seeing him too. But he sure seems like a big shot. You can feel it.
I agree, chuckling. True, next to him, Zach doesn't seem so hot, does he? Steve joined in the laughter. The gathering kicked off and Zach jumped into the driver's seat. He was still harping about his illustrious education, making it clear he looked down on us, the humble factory workers. Man, he loves to hear himself talk, I muttered, already sick of his long-winded speech. Steve and the rest of the factory crew agreed. Then I noticed a guy sitting next to the foreign executive director lean over and whisper something to Zach. Zach looked stunned for a sec, but swiftly moved on to the toast.
I bet he was told his speech was dragging.
Steve speculated, and we all had a good laugh. After the toast, it was time to mingle and enjoy the spread, and after a while, Zach ambled over to me and quipped,
Oh, even the middle school graduate made it. Your suit looks shabby.
Sure, I'm not exactly a pro at rocking suits, but did he really need to be that harsh? And to label me middle school graduate even here? Feeling a bit ticked off, I snapped back at Zach. Sure, I'm not a suit kind of guy, and Zach, would you cut it out with the middle school graduate thing? Instead of backing down, he just cracked a grin and fired back.
Well, ain't it the truth? You're just a factory grunt, no offense, and pretty much everyone could fill your shoe. We can't just go handing over important jobs to middle school grad unless you've got some secret skill we don't know about.
Zach was always like this, playing this power game, and as a middle school graduate, I was his favorite pawn. I instantly regretted my sass. Then Zach seemed to hatch some sort of scheme. He looked at me and smirked, causing a wave of unease to hit me.
Hey, get over here,
he called, tugging at my arm before I could even respond. Steve and the others watched on nervously, but nobody dared break the tense silence. Next thing I knew, I was standing on stage. The executive director, who had been deep in conversation nearby, swung his attention towards the stage as I walked over.
And now, for the little show,
announced Zach, launching into spiel about how I was a middle school grad, devoid of any special talents, but still hard work at the factory. The executive director's face tightened as he listened. Maybe he was also thinking he had no use for a middle school grad. I was mentally preparing myself for the worst when Zach dropped a bombshell.
However, there's one thing this guy can do. He can speak Spanish.
That left me dumbfounded. How did he even know I spoke Spanish? I'd never used it at the factory, but he answered my unspoken question pretty fast, all with a gleaming grin.
Now, entertain our foreign executive director in Spanish.
That's when it clicked. Zach was convinced I couldn't speak Spanish. He was trying to shame me in front of everyone by pushing me to speak a language he thought I couldn't handle. His smug smile was a dead giveaway.
Come on, get to it.
Zach prodded me. I squared my shoulder and thought, all right then. This wasn't going to go how he planned. I snatched the mic from him, starting with a self-introduction in Spanish. Zach was still grinning, probably figuring I could at least get my own name right. But when I told the joke in Spanish, the executive director burst into laughter, and Zach looked like he'd seen a ghost. Even for those fluent in Spanish, many jokes can be tough to understand. I certainly didn't get it the first time I heard it, but it always seemed to hit the right tone with Spanish speakers. The executive director had the characteristic features of a Latino. From what I could tell, he understood some English, but his main language was definitely Spanish. So, I turned towards the executive director, waving in jokes as I revealed Jack's poor behavior. The executive director, who started off laughing, slowly changed his demeanor. I thanked everyone for their attention and passed the mic back to dumbstruck Zach. The executive director lit into Zach in Spanish.
Huh? What?
Zach looked lost as the executive director laid into him. So I turned to Zach and in false shocked voice asked, Zach, you don't understand Spanish? He shook his head. So, wait, you forced me to speak Spanish, a language you don't even understand, all to make a mockery of me in front of everyone? Then, I translated the executive director's words for Zach, telling him that the executive director was asking if all I'd say was true, and warning that he couldn't assure Zach's role if it was. Zach went ghostly pale.
Hey, what did you tell him?
He sputtered. I smirked. I just filled him in on how you belittle me for being a middle school graduate. Say anyone could do factory work, your domineering behavior, and how you've been sneaking smokes in non-smoking zones.
You?
Zach's eyes bored into me, just as the executive director made his way up onto the stage to confront him. The exec pulled Zach aside and hit him with a hard question.
Is that how you see the folks working on the factory floor?
Zach went as pale as a sheet.
No,
He sputtered, caught off guard. The director looked at me and said,
Translate this for me. We're going to look into your conduct, Zach. If it turns out to be as bad as it seems, you'll be facing the consequences.
Zach just sank into a chair, shell-shocked. Our director took center stage again and told everyone,
Okay, folks, back to the party. Dig into the grub and enjoy your drinks.
And just like that, the room started to hum with chatter again. I was waved over by the director, who handed me a drink.
Impressive show back there,
he said. Thanks, I'm Joe. My mom came up with the name. He laughed and said,
It's a good name, Joe.
We chatted for a while, switching between English and Spanish. He seemed pleased we could talk openly, and I thanked him before heading back to my crew.
Way to go, Joe.
Steve and the guys insisted on a round of cheers for me. As for Zach, he seemed to have slinked out unnoticed. Later, the factory manager pulled me aside.
So there's this new project.
He started to lay out the exec's plan. They needed to make a specific part, but the manufacturer was based in South Africa. They needed a Spanish speaker. That's where I came in. I nodded in agreement, ready to jump in. Steve was excited to be on the team too.
This is a big one, right? I'm gonna give it everything I've got,
he said, bursting with energy. But then Zach showed up. He had been cheating since the social event, but the factory crew, including Steven the manager, kept him off my back. One day, though I was too busy to dodge him,
a project centered around a dropout like you is doomed to fail,
he spat out. I kept my cool and said, I'll make sure this project succeeds. I'll show the factory work isn't just for anyone. You know nothing about what we do here, do you? You strut around during inspections, spew some big talk, make fun of us, and then disappear. We take pride in our skills and don't need lectures from someone like you. He started to retort, but Steve beat him to it.
Joe's right, Zach. You don't get it at all. Joe's got some of the best skills in this factory. He's always positive and steps in when things get tough. He's a real team player. Quit it with the trash talk.
Steve's words made me a bit red-faced but also proud. Zach grumbled and stormed off. The manager reported the whole incident to the director, who was livid about Zach's behavior. Not long after, we got a new department head, a guy who really cared about what happened on the factory floor. I asked about Zach and found out the director had given him a real dressing down for not understanding that the backbone of our company was the factory crew. He'd been shipped off to some foreign factory. A month later, the new department head told me that Zach couldn't handle the language barrier at the overseas factory, got sick from stress, and ended up quitting. I doubt I'll cross paths with him again, but picturing his grumpy face can't help but make me chuckle. Right now, I'm knee-deep in the new project with Steve and the others. I let my mom know about it, and she was over the moon. Later, I'm joining my best buddy Ken for some drinks to celebrate.
You're killing it, Joe. But when are you gonna find a girlfriend?
Ken, geez. Well, it would be nice to put my mom's mind at ease. Maybe it's about time I started looking for that special someone.